My name is Loretta Monroe. I turned 69 last March, though I sometimes catch myself saying almost 70 when strangers ask. I don't know why. Maybe to save them from the mental math, or maybe because it feels honest, like rounding up my whole life into a neater box. I live alone, in a modest duplex on Oak Ridge Lane, where the lilacs from the old fence spill into my garden every May. It's a quiet place. I keep it tidy, if a little cluttered in the corners. Old books, framed photographs, the quilt I started after Frank died but never finished. The house is silent most days, save for the humming of the refrigerator, the ticking of the kitchen clock, and the radio I switch on every morning out of habit, even when I don't really listen. Sundays are different. Sundays belong to my daughter, Karen, and her family. It started after Frank passed, when the silence pressed too hard against the windows, and Karen, ever practical, ever kind, invited me to spend more time with the kids. At first, I resisted. I thought I'd be in the way, but she reassured me. The kids love having you, Mom. It helps so much. And so it became a rhythm. Every Sunday at 11, I put on lipstick and fresh earrings, pack something, banana bread, soup, whatever I think the grandkids will eat, and make the drive across town. Karen's house is larger, full of light and movement. There's always something to fix, a shoe to tie, a glass to refill. My grandchildren, Ellie and Max, greet me with sticky hands and shrieks of Grandma, as if I am Santa and the Tooth Fairy wrapped into one. I read to them on the faded rug in their playroom. I know their favorite stories by heart, the tales of dragons, lost dogs, the brave little girls. Sometimes I find myself slipping in extra lines, just for them, or pausing so they can guess what comes next. Ellie always gets it right. Other times, I cook while Karen and her husband, Paul, are occupied with their laptops or phones. I fold their laundry, iron school uniforms, mend a button here or there. I sweep the kitchen after lunch, wipe the counters, keep my hands busy. No one asks, but no one stops me either. There are no complaints, no crosswords, and for that I am grateful. I am useful, I tell myself. I am wanted. Still, sometimes I catch a look between Karen and Paul, one of relief, like a burden quietly shifted. And sometimes, after a long day, as I gather my empty casserole dish and say my goodbyes, I feel like a ghost moving through their lives, unseen until something needs doing. But I don't mention it. I am a mother, and mothers are meant to give, aren't they? Besides, there is comfort in the ritual, in the familiar voices, in the warmth of small arms thrown around my waist. I tell myself, this is love, and most days I believe it. I woke early that Sunday, the kind of morning when the spring sunlight falls in wide stripes across the kitchen floor. I'd baked the night before, a peach pie, the way Karen liked it when she was a girl, though now she claimed not to care for sweets. Still, I brushed the top with cream and sugar, hoping, quietly, to surprise her. After my shower, I spent too long fussing over my hair, then chose a blue cardigan, the one Ellie once said matched her favorite crayon. As I gathered my purse, I checked my phone, half expecting a message to cancel, but there was nothing. My week had been quiet. In fact, the only thing on my calendar was Sunday Karen's. The drive across town was familiar, past the park where I'd once pushed Karen on the swings, past the bakery where Frank and I used to stop for coffee after church. Sometimes those old places felt close, sometimes impossibly far away. I parked in front of their house at 10:58, too early but never late, and walked up the path. The forsythia by the steps was blooming gold. Everything seemed awake except, perhaps, me. Karen answered, hair pulled back, phone already in one hand, smiling but distracted. Hi, Mom. You're right on time. I held out the pie. Still warm. She glanced at it, nodded, then called over her shoulder. Paul, Mom brought pie. No one replied. From upstairs, a door closed. Ellie and Max, I guessed, in the midst of some sibling negotiation over blocks or crayons. I set the pie on the counter, taking in the familiar chaos. Backpacks by the door, crayons scattered across the dining table, Paul's laptop open, screen glowing with spreadsheets. Sunday, but work never really ended in this house. I hoped, just a little, that today might be different. Maybe we'd sit together for coffee. Maybe Karen would ask about the book I was reading, or show me her new garden plans. I missed talking to her, just talking, the way we once had when she was a child and every story mattered. Karen reappeared, hands full now, her planner, a mug, a stack of children's books. She smiled. I'm glad you're here, Mom. We have so much to do before tomorrow. Paul's got a call with the New York office, and I need to finish these slides. She trailed off, handing me the books. Could you read to them for a bit? You're in no hurry to go anywhere anyway, right? They've been waiting for you. Her tone was light, kind. The words themselves landed softly, but something in me pressed back, an ache, a pressure just below my ribs. Still, I nodded. Of course. I took the books, hardcovers, their spines worn soft. Stories of princesses, lost dogs, mischievous twins. These were my territory, the place I still felt needed. I called to Ellie and Max, who tumbled down the stairs, hair unbrushed, faces bright. They pulled me toward the living room, where sunlight made a warm patch on the old rug. I sat down, cross-legged, letting my skirt fan out. Ellie curled up on my left, Max sprawled on my right, already pulling at the top book. In the kitchen, I could hear Karen and Paul talking, their voices low and serious, occasionally drifting in and out, work, meetings, bills. Their world just beyond my circle of stories and little hands. I opened the first book and began to read. The children listened, as always, eyes wide, fingers tracing the pictures, asking questions only children think to ask. Why can't the dragon live in the city? Do you think the princess gets lonely? I answered every question, slipped voices and songs into the stories, the way I always had. I made them laugh, drew them close. But I was aware, suddenly, of the distance, not just across the room, but deeper, a gap that wasn't there before. As I read, I realized I'd been hoping today for something else, a seat at the table, a conversation, not just the gentle handoff to the kids. I wanted to be seen as more than a Sunday solution, a reliable background, as necessary but unremarkable as the ticking of their kitchen clock. Still, I finished the books. I watched Ellie and Max drift into play, their world bright and easy. I smoothed the rug, stacked the books, and sat quietly for a moment, pressing my hand to my chest. There was a tightness there, something wordless but real. I didn't mention it, not to Karen, who had already vanished back to her computer, not to the children, who never noticed my silences. Later, when Karen called from the kitchen, "Thanks, Mom. That was a lifesaver." I smiled, took my purse, and quietly let myself out. No one saw me leave. The pie was still on the counter, untouched. The late afternoon air was cool and gray as I stepped out of Karen's house, pulling the door closed with careful quiet. The screen door clicked behind me, a sound so familiar I could hear it in my sleep. I stood for a moment on the porch, feeling the weight of my purse in one hand and a vague ache in the other, where a child's head had just been resting. There was no one to wave goodbye. No voices called after me. Just the low hum of traffic from the avenue, and inside, the muffled, seamless sound of family life resuming as if I had never been there. I made my way to the car, pie crust flakes dusting my sleeve. I hesitated before getting in, looking back at the house, sunlight catching on the kitchen window, silhouettes moving inside. I wondered, not for the first time, How many women like me stood in driveways just like this every Sunday, year after year? There's a particular sort of invisibility you become accustomed to, an acceptance that, though you are loved, your love is expected to be as constant and unnoticed as the weather. The drive home felt longer than usual. I took the quiet roads, letting the radio play old standards, music I once shared with Frank, though now it only seemed to underline the emptiness of the passenger seat. Each red light felt like a small question. Where are you really going, Loretta? At home, the silence met me at the door. It wasn't an oppressive silence exactly. Rather, it was the kind that seeps into your bones after a long day of speaking only for the sake of others. I hung up my cardigan, set my purse on the sideboard, and placed my keys carefully in the blue bowl, always in the same place, as if order could substitute for connection. I made tea out of habit. The kettle whistled its thin, lonely tune, and the steam curled in the lamplight. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup, watching the light fade across the linoleum, listening to the house creak as it settled for the evening. My phone was silent. No messages, no missed calls. I scrolled absently through photos. Ellie at the park, Max in his dinosaur pajamas, Karen holding the baby years ago. A life spent in service and delight and small, loving chores. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift. A hollowness, yes, but also a spark, like the first cold wind in autumn that tells you to find your coat. I realized, sitting there, that what I felt wasn't resentment, it was absence. Absence of being heard, of being seen. I'd become the background hum, the reliable Sunday solution, my voice only ever raised in the service of someone else's peace and quiet. And then it struck me. I have spent my life giving voice to everyone but myself. I thought about the stories I read every week, stories of heroes and explorers, girls with red cloaks, and boys who ran with wolves. I thought about how, when I finished reading, the children would sigh, ask for just one more, how their eyes brightened, how the room felt changed for a moment, fuller somehow. Maybe, I thought, my voice is not invisible after all. Maybe it's simply in the wrong room. I finished my tea. I washed the cup, wiped the counter, and finally wandered into the living room, turning on the lamp beside my favorite chair. On the coffee table, a library newsletter peeked from under a magazine, announcing volunteers needed for reading programs. Help wanted in the children's section. I picked it up, tracing the bold letters with my finger. There was a comfort in the idea, a room full of children who wanted to listen, who would look up when I spoke, who might even remember the stories after I left. I sat for a long time, newsletter in my lap, letting the idea root itself quietly inside me. It felt unfamiliar and thrilling, like the first time Karen held my hand and called me Mama, or the first time I drove alone after Frank's funeral. Change, small and steady, growing in the silence. By bedtime, I had made my decision. If my voice was so easily taken for granted at home, I would find a place, somewhere, where it could matter, where it could fill a room, shape an afternoon, create a memory. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone before bed. I didn't rehearse tomorrow's chores or worry about being needed. Instead, I let the quiet fill me up, my mind settling on a single, hopeful thought. Tomorrow, I will go where someone is waiting to hear my story. Monday morning, the sun rose early, flooding my bedroom with a thin, determined light. I woke up with a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time, anticipation. Not the kind that comes before a family holiday, with its endless lists and subtle, underlying pressure, but something lighter, a bit uncertain, even a little thrilling. I made my bed carefully, smoothing each corner, and put on a crisp white blouse I usually saved for holidays. Over it, my softest blue cardigan, the one Ellie liked. I glanced in the mirror, tucked a stray hair behind my ear, and felt, briefly, the way I had decades ago on the first day of school, as a new teacher in a new town. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal with cinnamon, a few slices of pear. I washed the bowl, wiped the counter, and then stood for a moment in the quiet kitchen, listening to the world outside: birds, a distant lawnmower, the mail truck humming past. I let the silence fill me, not with loneliness this time, but with a kind of hopeful patience. The library was only a 15-minute walk, a pleasant stretch through streets still holding the chill of spring. My shoes crunched over last year's leaves as I made my way down Oak Ridge Lane, past tidy hedges and yards waking up from winter. Children waited at corners for the school bus. Mothers called reminders from open doors. And for once, I felt myself not on the outside looking in, but simply moving forward. When I reached the library, a brick building with ivy climbing up the old stone pillars, I paused, feeling a flutter in my chest. The heavy door opened easily, releasing the familiar gentle hush of books and whispers. I breathed in the comforting scent: dust, paper, coffee from the staff room down the hall. The front desk was staffed by Mrs. Peterson, whose hair was always in a neat bun and who knew everyone's name. She looked up, surprised, and smiled. "Loretta, how lovely to see you. Are you here for book club?" I shook my head, nervousness prickling in my palms. "Actually, I saw the notice in the newsletter about volunteers for the Children's Reading Hour." Mrs. Peterson's face brightened, her eyes softening. "Oh, wonderful. We're always looking for help with the little ones. We have a group coming in on Wednesday after school, if you'd like to observe. Or if you'd rather, you can help out right away." We chatted for a few minutes as she explained the program. Kindergartners and first graders came each week for stories, crafts, sometimes just to talk. Some had parents who worked late, others simply loved being read to. She handed me a schedule and, with a warmth that surprised me, invited me to join a planning meeting that afternoon. I agreed, and as I walked into the children's wing, something inside me shifted, like a room opening up after years with the windows closed. The space was cheerful, bright with primary colors, walls covered in drawings and handmade paper stars. The bookshelves were low and inviting, their shelves packed with battered favorites and shiny new titles. That afternoon, I sat with two other volunteers, both young women with easy laughs and gentle voices. We planned out the week: which books, which games, which children needed extra attention. When I mentioned some of the stories Ellie and Max loved, the group listened, nodded, and wrote down my suggestions. On Wednesday, I arrived early. I helped set up the room, laying out mats and arranging chairs in a loose circle. The children arrived in a rush of sneakers and backpacks, voices tumbling over each other in excitement and nervousness. Some clung to their teachers, others dove straight for the book bins. When the clock struck 3, Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands and the room settled. She introduced me. "This is Mrs. Monroe. She's here to read with us today." A few children glanced up, curious. A boy with glasses asked, "Can she do voices?" I smiled, heart fluttering. "I can try." I opened a book, The Big Friendly Bear, and began to read. At first, my voice trembled. Then, as the story unfolded, it steadied, found its rhythm, grew warm and inviting. The children leaned in, eyes wide, laughter bubbling at the bear's silly hat, gasps at the storm in the woods, quiet sighs at the happy ending. After the story, they clapped. A few little hands tugged at my sleeve, asking for more. One girl, shy and soft-spoken, asked if I could read her favorite next week. I promised I would. For the first time in years, I felt not backgrounded, but present, needed, noticed, even celebrated in the smallest of ways. At the end of the hour, Mrs. Peterson put my name on the reading board. Mrs. Monroe, story time. Over the next week, word spread. I was invited to lead reading aloud for the younger grades every Wednesday. Teachers thanked me. The librarian sent notes of appreciation, and a handful of children began to wait at the door for me to arrive, bouncing in place, clutching their favorite books. No one said, "You're in no hurry anyway." No one handed me a task to fill a gap in their schedule. Instead, my voice filled the room, listened to, anticipated, remembered. I walked home those days lighter, my step less burdened, my mind full of new names and favorite stories, the echo of children's laughter trailing behind me like bird song. For the first time in a long while, I was not just passing time. I was spending it where it mattered. The days slipped by, each one gently shaped by new routines. Wednesday afternoons became sacred, reserved for the library, for the children who waited with restless feet and impatient questions, for the stories that unfolded like new doors every time I opened a book. There was a hum to my life now, a subtle anticipation that threaded itself through my quiet mornings and unhurried evenings. I discovered that I remembered the names of every child, even the shy ones who sat on the edge of the circle, knees drawn up, eyes shining with hope that they wouldn't be called on and yet desperate not to be missed. I learned which books made them laugh, which made them gasp, and which ones they wanted to hear over and over until the library copy grew soft and creased from so many small hands. Some days, I brought extra stories in my tote bag, classics that had belonged to Karen when she was little, my penciled notes still in the margins, reminders to ask about the lost kitten or let her guess the ending. After the reading hour, I'd stay to help sort books, and sometimes a teacher would invite me to talk to a group of children who struggled with reading or who simply wanted another story before their bus arrived. For the first time since Frank passed, I no longer felt like the last page of the book, glanced at, set aside, quickly forgotten. Here I was, chapter after chapter, my words soaking into the hush and clatter of the library, my voice a gentle fixture in the bright, busy room. One Wednesday, as I was packing up after the reading hour, Mrs. Peterson called me over to the bulletin board in the main hallway. "Look, Loretta," she said, her voice proud. There, on a piece of construction paper bordered with gold stars, was a note in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Mrs. Monroe, for sharing your stories. You make the library a happier place." Beneath it, in a child's scrawl, another message. "I like when you make the dragon sound silly." And pinned to the side, a typed sheet headed Community Appreciation Board. My name was there, among the volunteers who brought music, organized crafts, and helped children with homework. My name, not just Grandma, not just Mom. That evening, the library hosted a parent-teacher night. The halls were crowded, filled with the pleasant chaos of coats, backpacks, and voices rising over one another. I stood with Mrs. Peterson near the children's section, answering a few questions from teachers, offering reassurance to parents who worried about their shy or boisterous children. In the flow of the crowd, I caught sight of Karen, my daughter, in a blue dress I didn't recognize, scanning the walls as if looking for something she'd lost. She looked tired, but determined, the way she had as a girl when searching for a misplaced toy. I felt a nervous flutter in my chest, an old habit, I suppose, from all those years of hoping to be seen. She approached, reading names on the appreciation board, pausing when she saw mine. Her eyebrows shot up, and she turned, finding me just behind her. "Mom," she said, sounding genuinely surprised, "are you, are you leading a class here?" I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, suddenly shy. "Yes, every Wednesday. I read to the younger kids. Some of them need a little extra help, and, well, it's become something of a tradition now." Karen glanced at the board again, her lips parting as if about to ask more, but she stopped herself. Her eyes flicked to the little notes and the drawings pinned beside my name. The dragon, the bear, the neat lines of a child's printing. I watched her take it in, confusion warring with a kind of dawning understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her tone uncertain. I thought for a moment. It just happened. I suppose I wanted to see if I could do it. Be useful, but in a different way. Not just filling in, you know? Karen didn't answer right away. Around us, children darted past, waving their artwork, tugging parents toward the book displays. A little girl from my Wednesday group broke away from her mother, rushing up to hug my waist. "Mrs. Monroe, are you coming next week?" I bent down, smoothing her hair. "Of course I am. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Karen watched the exchange, her eyes shining with something unspoken, a memory, maybe, of a time when she was the one tugging at my sleeve, eager for my voice, my stories, my company. After the girl left, Karen stood beside me in the quiet corridor. "So, you read here now?" I smiled. "Yes, it's where they ask me to read, not where I'm used to close the silence." She nodded slowly, a frown line between her brows as she considered my words. For a moment, I worried that I'd wounded her, that the new shape of my life was somehow a rebuke to hers. But then she touched my arm, gentle, uncertain. "I'm glad, Mom. I really am." There was more she might have said, but instead, she gave my hand a squeeze and let herself be pulled away by one of her own children, who wanted to show her the dragon picture. As I stood in that bright, noisy hallway, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a quiet, resonant echo of belonging. I had found a place where my voice wasn't a placeholder, but a gift, and that simple truth rippled outwards, changing things in small but unmistakable ways. I was still Loretta, still mother and grandmother, but now I was something more, a voice that lingered, that mattered, that made a space fuller just by being heard. The following Sunday, the air was thick with the promise of summer. Warmth pressed in at the windows. Birds were loud in the maple outside, and the world felt as if it had taken a long, deep breath. I woke early, as always, my body still tuned to habit, but the sense of purpose that had filled my week remained with me. I went about my morning, feeding the neighbor's cat while they were away, tidying the living room, sitting for a few minutes by the open window with my tea. Normally, by now, I'd be preparing for my visit. Pie or cake cooling on the counter, my Sunday sweater draped over the arm of the chair, purse waiting by the door. Today, there was none of that. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. A message from Karen. "Are you coming today? Ellie and Max miss you. Paul and I could use the help. Big project for work." I stared at the message a long moment. Once, I would have replied instantly, "Yes, I'll be there. Save me a seat." Now, I found myself hesitating, thinking not only of what was being asked, but of what I wanted for myself. I typed back, "I can't today, sweetheart. I have a schedule now. Wednesdays at the library, and the kids are waiting for a story." I almost added, "maybe next week," but stopped myself. I didn't want to offer myself as a contingency, a backup plan. I wanted to honor the promise I'd made to the children at the library and to myself. Karen called not long after, her voice more hurried than I remembered. "Hi, Mom. The kids keep asking if you're coming. We really could use you this morning. Paul's got deadlines and I'm just swamped. I know you've got your library thing, but can't you move it around? It's just reading, isn't it?" Her words stung more than I expected, but I tried to answer evenly. "It's not just reading, Karen. I have a group who waits for me every week, and it matters to them and to me. I'm no longer just a background. I promised I'd be there, and I don't want to let them down." There was a pause on the line, just the faint hum of Karen's breath, and the distant shouts of children in her kitchen. I didn't realize it was so important, she said finally, her voice small, uncertain. It is, I said gently. It's not that I don't love you all or want to see the kids, but this is something I do for me and for them. It makes me feel alive, Karen. It makes me feel seen. She was silent, and I let the moment stretch, giving her space to absorb it. I just, she tried again. I guess I thought you had all the time in the world. I didn't mean, I know, I interrupted softly. But that's the thing about time. You never know how much you really have and how precious it is until you spend it well. We ended the call politely, but with a weight I knew would settle into thoughtfulness later. I felt a mixture of relief and guilt, an old guilt, the kind mothers carry even when they do what's right for themselves. That afternoon, I arrived at the library early. The air inside was cool, the lights golden, the familiar hush a balm after the strained phone call. A few children were already there, sprawled on the rug or curled into bean bags, their faces brightening as I entered. Mrs. Monroe, did you bring the dragon's socks? I laughed, the tension easing from my shoulders. I wouldn't dream of coming without it. The next hour slipped by in laughter and quiet awe, the children's eyes fixed on every word, their questions tumbling out in a happy jumble. For the first time in years, I realized Sunday no longer owned me. I was no longer anchored to the expectation of usefulness, to being always available, always on call. I had chosen a new place, a new rhythm, a new value for my time and voice. When story time ended, a small girl with braids handed me a drawing, a lopsided dragon in rainbow colors, holding a book. For you, Mrs. Monroe, you make stories come alive. I thanked her, heart full, and carefully tucked the picture into my purse. As I walked home, the sun dipping low, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My family was still my family, my love for them unchanged. But now, at last, I had found a way to be present without erasing myself, a way to belong without disappearing. That evening, Karen sent another message, softer this time. We'll see you when you're free. The kids told their teacher they have the best grandma. I'm proud of you, Mom. I read the message twice, tears pricking my eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet recognition I'd waited for all along. I replied, I love you, Karen. I'll see you soon, on my own terms. And as night settled in, I turned out the lights and sat in the hush of my living room, the dragon drawing propped on the mantel. For the first time, I felt fully present, my own, and at last, enough. The weeks that followed unfurled with new steadiness, like pages of a well-loved novel finally read at a pace that made sense. My life no longer revolved around waiting for Sunday or for someone else's request. Instead, I moved by my own seasons, Wednesdays in the library, quiet afternoons on the porch, Saturday mornings spent visiting the small farmer's market, sometimes running into one of my new library kids with their parents, beaming with pride as they waved. The change at home was subtle at first. Karen called a little less often to ask for help. Her messages now sounded lighter, less hurried. Sometimes she just called to chat about something small, a recipe, a movie she'd watched, how the garden was coming along. Once, she even sent a picture of Ellie's drawing, scrawled with "For Grandma" in purple crayon. It felt, finally, like we were learning to speak to each other as two women, not just mother and daughter, not just problem and solution. Ellie and Max, too, began to change. When I did visit, they greeted me not with the desperation of children whose parents needed a break, but with genuine excitement. Grandma, are you going to read at school this week? Can we come listen? They wanted to know about the library, about the other kids, about what stories I'd be sharing. Sometimes they'd come home from school with their own library books, eager to have me read to them, not as a duty, but as a treat, something chosen and cherished. And then, one Wednesday, the boundaries shifted even further. As I set out for the library, a little earlier than usual, my phone buzzed. Karen's message was brief. Ellie and Max want to join your class after school today. I thought I'd come too, if that's all right. It was more than all right. My heart raced as I walked to the library, a mix of nerves and pride. I arrived to find the children's section already a whirl of activity. Mats being arranged, a circle of eager faces gathering in anticipation. When Karen and the children walked in, Ellie clung to her mother's hand, a shy smile on her face. Max carried his favorite book, holding it out like a secret. I knelt to greet them, smoothing Ellie's hair, squeezing Max's shoulder. You're just in time. We're reading about a dragon who loves to bake, I whispered. As I began, I caught Karen's eye. She stood in the back, arms crossed but not closed off, her face softening as she watched. I could see in her expression the flickers of memory, of her own childhood, of Sunday afternoons, of the quiet magic a story can bring. This time, as I read, my voice was steady and joyful. I was aware of every child in the circle, of the small hands fidgeting with shoelaces, the faces lit with expectation, the way even the restless ones seemed to quiet as the story swept them up. And I was aware, too, of my family, no longer on the periphery, but fully present, not because I was convenient, but because I was wanted. When I finished, the room broke into applause. Ellie and Max rushed over to hug me, their classmates joining in, clamoring for more. Karen lingered at the edge, waiting until the rush faded. That was wonderful, Mom, she said quietly. I see why they love it, why you love it. I smiled at her, feeling a lightness that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with choice. It's different, isn't it? I said. Being here because you want to be, not because you have to. Karen nodded, blinking back tears. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I squeezed her hand. We all get used to things, sweetheart, but it's never too late to listen, to change. After that day, things were never quite the same. Ellie and Max began to ask if they could visit Grandma's library class more often, sometimes bringing friends. Other parents asked about joining, and Mrs. Peterson joked about needing a bigger reading circle. Karen volunteered once or twice herself, helping with crafts or shelving books, and, for the first time in years, I saw her as a woman navigating her own life, not just my little girl struggling to keep up. At home, our visits grew richer, filled with shared meals, slow walks, even the occasional story told just for fun. The air was lighter, less charged with expectation. We were, all of us, learning the difference between being needed and being chosen. And as for me, I no longer measured my worth by the number of chores completed, pies baked, shirts ironed, or quiet hours spent in the background. Instead, I cherished the sound of laughter in the library, the bright eyes waiting for a new story, the feeling of my voice finding its place in the world, not as wallpaper, but as the music in the room. On a bright afternoon near the end of the school year, the principal stopped by the library to thank the volunteers. As she handed me a bouquet of wildflowers, she said, Mrs. Monroe, you've changed this place for the better. Your stories don't just fill the silence. They give us all something to carry home. That night, I set the flowers on my kitchen table and looked around my tidy, sunlit house. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel empty or overlooked or taken for granted. I felt present and whole and, at last, truly heard.